Hello, everyone. Welcome to this first series of webinars about novel foods and sustainable foods. And it's a great pleasure today to welcome our guest, Vincent Doumeizel, which is a bit the Che Guevara of seaweed or the seaweed revolutionary. Hello, Vincent. Welcome.
Hello, thank you very much.
We know each other, I think, for almost 15 years
Yeah,
now
quite a
in,
long time, yeah.
previous career step where
Mm.
you're still you will tell us a bit about your career. It's my pleasure to welcome you. You are not only director of the food program at Lloyd's Register Foundation, but also senior advisor at the United Nations Global Compact
Yeah,
and author of this great book that I
thank you.
read with really big interest. And I think it's a very interesting way to present all what is needed to know about seaweed, and it's really a page turner, must I say. So can you tell us how you got into this seaweed world?
Well, as you know, I come from the food system, the food world, the food industry. We used to go together there. And actually, what dawned on me after some years, I started my career in Africa, where I've seen the real face of the world hunger, and it's not looking good at all. So over my career in the food industry, I realized that we were lacking solutions in terms of how to feed the world of tomorrow. You can see that. There's already 1 billion people starving on this planet. You have 300,000 people in addition to feed every day on the planet. The yields are not increasing anymore for the main crops. The cities are growing bigger and bigger, eating arable lands. And we know that in the next 50 years or so, in order to feed the entire population, we will have to produce as much food as we produced over the last 10,000 years. And clearly, in the meantime, our food systems became the biggest contributors to the acceleration for the environmental crisis and climate crisis. So not only it's not providing enough food, but it's destroying our environment and our planet. So I was like, we cannot only give this to our children. We need to design something new. And then when you step back, you realize that the planet is covered by 70% with ocean that contribute to less than 3% of our food. So if we want a growth avenue in terms of food production, it's there, it's in our ocean. And then you realize, which is explains the title of the book, The Seaweed Revolution, that we did a green revolution back 12,000 years ago when we moved from prehistory to modern history. But we never did that revolution in the ocean, where we are still hunters-gatherers. Fishing is mostly hunting. So we are still to deliver that revolution in the ocean and become civilized with the ocean. So and if you want to repair the ocean instead of destroying them, you need to start with the lowest trophic level, with the start of the food chain and the chain of life in the ocean. Then you end up with what is the source of life on the planet, which are seaweed. And seaweed, it will feed phytoplankton, it will feed mollusk and shellfish and small fish and the rest of the biodiversity in the ocean. So it can really enable a very regenerative food system, which is why I gradually moved from food to seaweed, in fact.
What's very interesting in the book is actually you show a little bit the timeline of seaweed from minus 12,000 years in Chile, I believe, until 2050. So you have a projection about what the world could be in 2020. And also what amazed me is the diversity. Because it's true that, as you mentioned sometime, actually we do nothing about seaweed. Our level of knowledge is very, very poor. And it's really diverse. There's a huge
Yes,
diversity in the seaweed world.
very wide diversity of seaweed indeed, as it is displayed here. So there's really different type of organism, different properties, very different genetics. different way to reproduce, which makes things complicated, because actually we don't know yet how to cultivate our endemic seaweeds in Europe, for instance. So there's a wide diversity, and I'm not gonna talk about the microalgae, the small here, or the cyanobacteria like spirulina, which is actually not a seaweed. Huh? I always question about spirulina, but spirulina is not a seaweed. It's not an algae either, by the way. It's a cyanobacteria. And the only commonality between these three groups that we have here, the red, the brown, and the green, are that they photosynthesize and they evolve in water. The most important is the red, which we are 6,000 species. There's the brown, which are the most important group in terms of volume, because the brown seaweed are very big, and that's the one you see mostly in the ocean when you are on the beach. The red, you know them because you can see some of them. You eat already some of them as sushis and stuff like this. And the green are a little bit less known, but there's an interesting aspect about it. And they are very, very, very diversified. And they all have, especially the green and the red, they have a very long history over our time. So they both, I mean, we know that algae first started back 4 billion, 3.5 billion years ago. And that, exactly as is displayed here, they created life and oxygen on the planet. And then they evolved into macroalgae, so these complex organisms, vegetal, and which were red and green macroalgae. And this macroalgae, 500 million years ago, the green one moved on land because of the waves and the winds and the tides. They moved on land and gave birth to the entire vegetal biodiversity that we have on land today. So typically, a green seaweed is genetically closer today to an oak tree or to a rose or to a palm tree than it is to a red seaweed. And the difference between a red seaweed and a green seaweed is bigger than the difference between a fungi and a mammal, like an elephant. So it's really massive. We're talking about totally different organism.
It's really incredible. When I read that, I love this anecdote between the different genetic difference is the same as between an elephant and a fungus.
And it's important because it really offers an equally wide range of application. And the first being the food, of course, the food application, which is, and the thing is that it's not a concept. I mean, seaweed doesn't need anything. It does not need pesticide. It does not need land. It does not need to be fed. And guess what? You don't even need to water them. Of course, and it's not a concept. It's there already in China because and North Asia, because they had to feed a lot of people over the last decades, and because they had a close tradition that links closely health and food. While we feel like more like food is a source of energy, but in China in Asia tradition they relate food to the health, to your health. And seaweed being the healthy food by excellence.
That's the thing. No, that's the thing. No, that actually today most of the seaweed culture in both senses, in food culture and
tradition is in China. Yeah, you have in Asia. Sorry. Yeah, 99.5% of the cultivation happens in Asia. And the production, because they produce 36 million tons of seaweed a year, which is massive. We are talking about the equivalent of big crops in Europe. And while France, which is our country, for instance, second biggest country in maritime country in the world, we produce only 0.1% of the global seaweed production. So we are nowhere. We are hunters gatherers, and here you have indeed a very nice farm in Asia, in China, in Xiapu. I think it's over 200 square kilometers covered by farms, which are restoring biodiversity. Well, that was important. It is cleaning the ocean in this bay, and it is restoring biodiversity there. So not only it produces a lot of food, contributing to feed billions of people, but it also restores biodiversity. But yeah, as such, seaweed is first an excellent source of food. already quite common in Asia, notably in Japan, and we all know that from the sushi restaurant and from the Japanese restaurant. Indeed, yeah, here. So it's an excellent source of food. There's interesting properties. Japan, seaweed is present in 10% of the dishes in Japan, so it's really everywhere, and it contributes to the very long life expectancy in Japan and the very low level of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, or cancer. So there's a strong health impact. It's a health benefit when it comes to seaweed. It's a nutritional bomb, basically. Seaweed has everything you need. Exactly, magnesium. It's more magnesium than chocolate, actually, in some seaweed. So you don't have any excuse to eat chocolate anymore. It's very low.
The women that are fans of chocolates
Yeah,
will get up in the morning, in the night for seaweed, but why not?
exactly. Well, you can mix chocolate and seaweed, by the way. There's some interesting prototype about it. It's full of protein. Dulse or nori, the sushi that is wrapping the seaweed that is wrapping the sushi, is 40% protein. When you compare to soy meal, 25%, then it's really good. Vitamin B12, which is so important to our brain, and that you can only find in animal and seaweed. So that's what is the only for vegan or vegetarian people. It's very important. Zinc, omega-3 long chain, phosphorus, vitamin of all kind, umami flavor as well, which is a new flavor. And we have only 4 flavors identified so far. With the umami, it's a new territorial, it's a new gastronomic territory for the chefs who are very interested. There is no poisonous seaweeds; they are all edible, all comestible. So you can eat all of them. There's absolutely no problem. And the good thing as well,
this is something that we don't know, because we hear about the toxicity of seaweed, but it's a result of pollution, I guess.
Yeah, of course. Where if it's in very polluted bays, of course it's a concern. But you know very well. I mean, over the food chain, the heavy metal, for instance, they accumulate over the food chain. So you have more risk eating a tuna that comes from a polluted area than seaweed, because seaweed will not accumulate much of the heavy metals. And the other good thing with seaweed is that if you dry them, unlike terrestrial plant, they will keep all their nutrients. So they will keep them for months without any need for any cold chain or whatsoever. So that's very good, because it can really provide a source of food, and you don't need any cold chain. You can transport them for kilometers. Good news for your planet and for the emerging population and for our climate. So it has a lot of benefit.
Interestingly, you mentioned that thanks to B12, omega-3, actually, probably the evolution of a man is related to the consumption of algae, right?
Yeah, exactly. We are what we are because we were eating a lot of seaweed, in fact, over the last thousand and hundreds of thousand years. So yeah, I mean, it is clear that our brain has become so complex just because we were able to eat a lot of seaweed over thousands of generations, until we lost that connection when the Greeks and the Romans came, and the Mediterranean culture was so influential. But before that, over thousands of generations, we were living by litorals and eating a lot of like the coast, eating a lot of seaweed. So which is these polyunsaturated fatty acids that are present in seaweed enable the mutation in your brain to become so big compared to our body mass.
Wow. Yeah, and of course, there is this enormous benefit in terms of nutrition, but it's used for other foods also. Not.
Well, it's already used in many products. Maybe you can show, but it's already used in many products, but we don't know about it. Of course, it's used as an extract. Actually, the question here is which of the following does not contain seaweed extract? Well, none of them. They all contain seaweed extract. It is used to protect the meat, to enable fermentation by the beer. I mean, of course, the gelling and the texturing aspect of all these products are due to seaweed extract like carrageenan, agar-agar, or alginate, which are used in all these products. So it's already a mainstream product in the food industry, but unfortunately we use only extracts that are not highly interesting. It's just from a nutritional perspective, it's only interesting for their texturing and gelling agent. But we should learn to use all the benefit from the seaweed.
And today, actually, what is the percentage, or do you know the percentage of the seaweed industry which is focused on these derivatives, alginates and agar-agar?
Well, it's all it's not big. I mean, but it's all the industry. In Asia, the North Asia is focusing on seaweed as a source of food, and the South Asia, like Indonesia, Philippines, and a bit in Tanzania, is focused on seaweed as an extract. So I would say 40% of the seaweed production in the world. But it's not a very nice model because it's really a north-south model where south export to the north. So what we'd like to do is, and we are using only 25% of the seaweed when we use this gelling agent. So we would like them to use more than this and to use all the nutritional benefit more importantly, because nutrition remains a problem in these countries as well. So it's a lack of traditional knowledge there about the benefit from these seaweeds.
And of course, well, there is nutrition, but there is also a lot of other actual or potential uses. I know that you mentioned some in the book, and you show some of them. We have
here, of course, yes. There's a lot of other application, and it has been. I mean, it has always been used. I explained in the book how we won the First World War producing gunpowder out of seaweed in California. But indeed, here you can see some of the products that can be used for seaweed. So the first is the bubble of water that you see over there, which we placed in the London Marathon. All the 90,000 plastic glasses can be used for ketchup and also for whiskey. I know you're a big fan. No, it can be a source of plastic, and can be even like hard plastic. It can replace the food boxes because there's a dirty secret at the food boxes. There's always a plastic layer. Otherwise, it could be to prevent the absorption of the sauce by the box. Yeah. So with seaweed, I mean, when you create these boxes with seaweed, you don't need any plastic layers. You can create shoes. You can create dresses out of seaweed. The fashion industry is getting more and more interested because cotton is quite an unsustainable resource that needs a lot of water and use a lot of pesticide. So you can see a lot of different potential use for new material, very sustainable material. But the most exciting might be the plastic one. This company, Notpla, and there are 35 companies working in seaweed as a substitute to plastic in the world. So it's really a booming industry. And the company Notpla, who is producing this bubble of water and some other magic things that I'm sure you will show, has received this one, typically a box, a pasta bag that you don't. There's no packaging anymore. So it's dissolved in boiling water, and same with your coffee. So it has been awarded by the Earthshot Prize, rewarded by the Prince William last month or a couple of months ago, and won 1 million doing that. So that's great achievement, and we feel like plastics should be really substituted by seaweed. And if you think about it, it makes sense because plastic is made out of oil, and oil is dead seaweed and dead algae that has been fossilized and sedimented over millions of years. So we have built the entire success of our recent society over dead algae, in fact, oil, and we should now move to living organism instead of dead organism. That would be much more regenerative.
Oh, wow. And it's of course first impact also in terms of pollution, to avoid the plastic pollution, and there's a big hint also on sustainability in terms of not using fossil resources.
Yeah, exactly. Fossil fuel. Yeah.
And of course, the next big thing with seaweed that you explain quite well is all the sustainable aspect of it. So more not only replacing plastic, but much more benefits in sustainability.
Yeah,
And one
it
is
will have a lot. Well, first of all, we will find, I mean, that we will have to change the culture so that people can eat seaweed first. And it may take time, but it's not problem because actually we can feed our animal with seaweed, which would be a very good idea. Because first of all, for fish, for instance, it does sound more logical to feed our fish, our aquaculture fish, with seaweed instead, rich in protein and local, instead of soy meal that are GMO that deforested Amazon,
yeah.
and that travel the world. So that's the first stage. But it's also valid for land animals, which can benefit from eating seaweed that will increase their immune system. It will, and then you can cut the use of antibiotics with them.
You mentioned in the book these ships, right, which are in
Yeah, exactly. This great ships from North Malfay in the in the Orkneys in Scotland, and they are actually on the beach, and they are the only animal on the planet that are eating only seaweed, and they are known to be some of the best ships of the world because they are the ones served to the Queen and the King. So they are very good meat, and they eat only seaweed. So they manage to. There's a lot of other potential. I mean, there's a small red seaweed that can cut methane emission by 90%. So if you give just 40 grams of that small seaweed to each and every cow on the planet, it would be equivalent for our climate to stop each and every car on the planet. That's overnight. So that would be quite impressive. So we still have to learn how to domesticate that small seaweed. But
these ships, it's quite ancient tradition, right?
yeah. Well, this one, they are here for in this island for 5 or 4,000 years, and they are fed only. And actually, when human beings went on the island and established in these islands, they were competing with ships, which were very numerous. So they decided to put them on the shore. They built a big wall around the island so that they cannot get in, and so they can do their land cultivation, the inhabitants, and then the ships were stuck on the shore. So they had to eat only seaweed, but that was fine. I mean, and seaweed is antibacterial, it's antifungal, it's antiviral, it's analgesic. It's the best prebiotics you can find. So really, it has a lot of benefit for human being and for animals, but also for the plants as well. I mean, we should think about a more regenerative agriculture using seaweed. Seaweed will enrich the soil, but it will also make the plants more resistant. Exactly, and even more importantly, we will move to some kind of regenerative agriculture. I mean, regen ag is the new trend for the food industry, but there cannot be regenerative agriculture without the ocean. I was there last week in Caribbeans, and you can feel there with the sargassum drama that's happening there that this everything we maybe you can put again the draw, because everything we do on land ends up in the ocean, and the cows that so you can see here at the top, you can see what's the situation right now. We put a lot of pesticides on our land. Most of it ends up in the ocean. There's a lot of nitrogen that will come from our livestock. Everything ends up in the ocean, and then it creates these big invasive seaweed tides that end up on the shore and destroy life in the ocean and in the shore. In China, they did something very clever. They build seaweed farm exactly where these nutrients are coming from the land. So the nutrients are from the land that are used in agriculture are feeding the seaweed. There are specific seaweed that grows and that stay stuck to the substrate. So so Chinese people just come, they harvest the seaweed, and then they get them back on land. So it can feed in nitrogen and phosphate the cultures, the cultivation. So that really creates a virtuous cycle. so an holistic cycle, which is important because if you think about it, phosphate comes from mining industry. We will run short of it in a few decades, and without phosphate, there's no agriculture. So we will be in big trouble with a shortage of pesticides of all kinds, notably phosphate. And the Chinese, in the meantime, they will learn and become neutral in phosphate in the next decade. So within 6 to 10 years, they will be neutral. They will absorb through their seaweed farm as much for phosphate as they spill in the water. So that's going to be very, very clever, very smart. So I think we should get inspired from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very nice development. And indeed, in the you talk also about Seaweed Forest, right?
Yeah, man, that the way we should call them differently. I mean, I think seaweed doesn't pay tribute to what they are. We could call them, first of all, because you cannot smoke them. I mean, despite all the applications, there's one, so it's not weed, but you can call them sea vegetables, so you can understand how good they are, how delicious they are, or sea forest. So you can understand that we need to protect them. This one, for instance, it's a macrocystis forest. 80% of these forests in California have disappeared. It was the biggest one in the world, sequestering more carbon than and producing much more life than any terrestrial forest. And over the last 5 years, 80% of these has disappeared. So we should protect and learn how to protect this forest. So that's so important. And we should replant and preserve them. And in addition, we should cultivate. So we will repair the biodiversity in the ocean, which is important because we have destroyed it. And doing that, we will sequester a lot of carbon. And seaweed can also be seen as a very good way to mitigate climate change in very different way. On one hand, by decarbonizing the economy, because as bioplastic or animal feed, biofuel, textile, whatever, it will provide solutions to decarbonize the economy. But it will also sequester carbon. As you can see here, the big difference with a tree is that a tree, when you absorb carbon, it is quite a short sequestration actually, because as soon as you eat the fruit of the tree is losing branches or is losing leaves or is dead, it will be degraded by bacteria that release the carbon to the atmosphere. So all in all, it will be very short sequestration in a tree or in any land plant. But when it comes to seaweed, I mean, a lot of it will goes down in the deep ocean. And even if you eat them in the end, seaweed will lose a lot of biomass during their growth phase because of the friction. They are rubbed by the current, by the water, and so forth. So a lot of the biomass is lost during the growth phase, up to 50%, and it's ending up in the deep ocean where there's no bacteria to degrade them. So actually, seaweed is the natural way to move carbon from the atmosphere to the deep ocean. So and to put it back where it used to be actually before we start to dump it in our car and in our atmosphere. So that's a very nice way to create some natural carbon sink. There's a small seaweed called azolla that proliferated back 50 million years ago. At this time, the planet was very warm, this very seaweed has decreased the temperature of the planet by 20 degrees, creating the climate that we have today. So it has been done before. So there's a role to play there. I mean, in terms of climate change mitigation.
Mm-hmm. And then to put the seaweed, the sea vegetables, they go directly in the deep ocean, gradually in the deep ocean, or we need also in some cases to help them to make sure that
we should be clever about where we grow them, because but seaweed can drift for many kilometers. So as soon as they detach from the substrate, as soon as you lose some biomass, some cells, they will go in the water, and some of it will go in the deep ocean. We should be careful on that as well. I mean, we should not dump too much of them in the deep ocean, because we should be mindful about the consequences that this could have on the ocean ecosystem as a whole. but because seaweed has also a role to play to restore the ecosystem, so and not to destroy, not to create additional. And last, but certainly not least, the benefit of seaweed is that it will create source of jobs and revenue in coastal community, notably in Africa, where it benefits mostly to women, like a country like Tanzania, where seaweed has developed over the last 30 years. We can see that a lot of this has benefited to women and to the coastal community, where fishing resources are declining. And I have I think some picture of this seaweed farm in Africa, and it's very, very low capex investment. You just need a stick and then some cable, and then the seaweed grows. So it's a very good source of revenue for coastal communities, which is so important to mitigate as well the social injustice.
There's a question from our audience, Colleen, which is asking if you talked about the pesticides from the farmland, and what is the impact of these pesticides to the algae and how they create.
They feed them. Basically, pesticides are feeding the algae just like they are feeding the plants. So that's exactly the same, which explains the proliferation of seaweed in North Brittany or in Caribbean. Because it's just like, you have a fire and then you drop some oil on it. So that's exactly the same. You drop fertilizers on seaweed, it will just feed them. But seaweed are able to keep these nutrients, and then you can reuse that in a circular economy. That's what is very interesting. But it will not harm them, at least. It will be quite beneficial to them and make them bigger.
But of course, there might be residues, or pesticides residues in the algae, right?
Well, just like you have pesticide residues in the plant. When you drop pesticides in the plant. So, the question is always a question about the dose, how much you have. It might be more diluted than on the plant. But at least, once again, you get phosphate and nitrogen. So you recover this compound, which is needed. So yeah.
Great. And so you have already talked about climate change and how it can help. There is, of course, a lot of some of the elements that you have already mentioned, which are contributing to the SDG, right? So this is really
that's why the United Nations is very interested in seaweed. It's because we have it really addresses a lot of the SDGs through many different ways, and we are yet to discover what we can do with seaweed. Actually, there's what cannot be done with seaweed, almost nothing. What can we do today with seaweed? Almost nothing. So that's the problem we have right now. But there's really many different SDGs you can meet using seaweed, which is once again why the EU has decided to take a driving seat. The UN, has decided to take a driving seat in terms of implementing a global seaweed strategy over the world, and which is why we have started with the Seaweed Manifesto, trying to with this manifesto, we have gathered a lot of companies, a lot of universities, and decided to tell from a very natural and science-based perspective what is the potential of seaweed and how to enable it. And one of the key conclusions was that there is a lot of fragmentation in this sector. There is very small players and no collaboration, which is why we have decided to create a coalition in order to gather all that was the next one. All these players, and one of the objectives of the coalition is notably to create global regulation for the environment, for the safety also of you can move back, but also for the food regulation, which is a very important topic, the food regulation, because there's a wide range of food regulation, totally illy patchwork of regulation over the world at the moment. So we need to move to a more consistent food safety regulation when it comes to seaweed. We are working with the FAO on that. We expect we have a draft a report, a technical report, to upload seaweed in the Codex Alimentarius, seaweed food safety regulations. because you can see big discrepancies right now. I mean, the tolerance for iodine is 100 times lower in Europe and US than it is in Japan, where they eat seaweed every day, and still they tolerate 100 times more iodine. So you see the kind of situation where seaweed producer in the West, in Europe, are exporting their production to Japan, and then once it's valid on the Japanese market because there's too much iodine, they re-import it in France or in Europe because it, as per the trade agreement, once it's valid in Asia, it becomes valid in France or in Europe. So there's this kind of crazy situation. So it looks like a detail, but it's very important. We need to have the right. We are way too cautious when it comes to seaweed and food safety in general in Europe. We have crazy discussion with the food safety authorities. So yeah. So we need to be very much more science-based here and develop science. But there's a big gap in science. That's the problem. We have very little scientists working on seaweed, and we need to grow bigger about that. And we need to be in a position to tell the food safety authorities, well, that's what it should be, which is what we're trying to do with this coalition as well.
But because in terms of food safety, I mean, the risks are related to in those documents, one where you worked on, right, from the FAO. There is a sort of HECCP analysis or risk analysis of food safety.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you find the same kind of hazards than in other food. Cultivated food, right? There is not.
Well, there is less actually because a lot of the toxin or the pests that developed in food, in terrestrial food, cannot develop in seaweed. So it's kind of cool. Once dry, I mean, you can really keep them for months, if not years. So there's a lot of advantage. Now the main problem lies with the heavy metals, iodine level, and so forth. So that's. That's quite tricky as well because the content will vary from a season to another, from a location to another. So we just have to be careful and once again science-based when it comes to establishing regulation and not trying to be as safe as possible and so forth. Because
precaution principle that we know in other areas. Should be more inspired from what exists in those countries that are consuming.
Exactly,
algae.
We should look what's existing in Asia, which is difficult because of the language barrier. So yeah, we should.
There must be some translators, no?
Not much. No, it's very difficult actually because once again, it's all very nascent and fragmented. And no, we have no clear. I mean, and that's what we did with FAO. We had some translation of the Japanese and Korean regulation, because that was not existing really before.
So regulation, as you mentioned, is also one challenge. There is the way we
big challenge for the food safety, for the product safety, for the environmental safety, or for the occupational safety. We need to get global guidance, global regulation, global standards. That is highly missing at the moment. There's a smaller MSC standards for that has been released, but that's for seaweed, but that's about it.
So what can we do, Vincent?
We are all actors of the change, so you have to vote. You can join the coalition here. You can check more about the Seaweed Manifesto here. You can join our coalition. It's a totally free coalition. So you can become part of it, and we are releasing funds to support projects. We are sharing a lot of information about what's going on in the seaweed industry, what are the big things happening, what are the big innovations. So you can become a member. Once again, it's absolutely free. It's supported by the Lloyd's Register Foundation. Then we can eat seaweed. We can try to incorporate seaweed in our supply chain because we are in that position here. Try to understand better all their benefits, talk about them around us, and be a driver of the change. Because I mean, it's all about us in the end. We are all connected to the same food system, and it all starts there. So we have to drive. And I think seaweed is a solution for the next generation. It's not the silver bullet, but clearly it's a jack of all trades that can address a lot of different things or support addressing them. So we should try to support that and see how we can stop feeding the next generation with fear and drama, but feed them instead with hope and solution indeed, and make them the first generation on this planet who managed to feed the entire world while mitigating climate change, restoring biodiversity, and alleviating poverty. I think they could be remembered as such, and I really, really hope they will, and we will have to support them a lot.
That's a great message to end this webinar. But you also mentioned that, of course, we need scientists, right? Because as you said, there's a lot
we need more scientists. We need to establish a new permaculture in the ocean, not to reproduce the mistakes that we did on land with GMO, monoculture, industrial agriculture, and so forth. We need to build something new, something regenerative. And we need to understand what's happening in the ocean. We know better what's happening on the moon than in the ocean at the moment, and that's a big problem. So we need a new generation of scientists who wants to innovate, who want to change the world, and possibly to save it. So yeah, I keep being asked if we can save the ocean, but I think this is not the reality. The reality is that the ocean can save us.
Yeah. I know what you mean. So what we can do also is, and this is a bit not only advertising, but really I recommend this book. So I have this French version. Then there is the versión española, La Revolución de las Algas.
Sí, La Revolución de las Algas. Since February, since last February, and then next month the Seaweed Revolution in English, indeed,
Yeah, the Seaweed Revolution, and in April, the 19th of April, there is the pocket version.
And then we have the Italian and Chinese version that are cooking, and then a comic book for kids, and a comic book for like older kids and adult, and all kind of.
Netflix. When is the documentary for Netflix planned? Not yet.
We are talking about it.
Tell me about.
There's something cooking there, but it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, of course, I can imagine. What will be the particularity of the Seaweed Revolution book? You mentioned to me.
In English we will have it will be a first one in the first book in the history with a jacket made from seaweed. So the cover will be made from seaweed, just like some kind of it will look like this a bit. That's seaweed paper, and because just like seaweed is an ancestor of our trees, so you can do paper with seaweed as well. So this will be the first ever book to have a seaweed jacket, and we will launch it and distribute this special edition during the launch event, which is organized at the Natural History Museum in London on April 27th.
Great, but it's not to eat. You don't have to eat the cover.
You could actually. You could. You have to be very brave, but you could.
It's great. It's really Thank you so much.
My pleasure, always.
And really, I discovered actually a lot thanks to your book and
there's much more we can discover. So stay tuned. There's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of news all the time. So we have to stay in touch and welcome in the revolution to all of you.
Yeah. Very well. So thank you. Have a nice, happy Easter holiday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to everyone here, and let's see.
I will hide a seaweed in the garden for my kids instead of Easter eggs.
You can tell me how it works. Great.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.